All righty then. Hello, everybody. This is Uncontrolled Opposition. I am Jayme CheeseSlice, the engineer and producer of this fine show. And welcome to December, everybody. I can't believe the years have already flown by when we're in that last home run stretch to Christmas. So today we got a show for you about Vietnam, a book titled Precious Freedom by James Bradley. If this is your first time ever watching Uncontrolled Opposition on the YouTube channel, thank you for being here, first of all. But this is a radio program, first and foremost, and we're going to be recording about an hour session for that radio edit that will air later, and that goes on WBAI and the Progressive Radio Network. So that's what's going on here. When you get to watch it live, you get to see it fully uncut. And if we make mistakes or anything, you get to see all that too. But that's just going to be for the YouTube audience. Later on, it gets edited down. But without further ado, let me bring on our host, Gloria and Jayme. How are you guys doing today? Are you ready to do this?
Hey, Jayme.
It's a happy December, you guys. I can't believe it already. Okay.
Flying by.
I know. And our guest, James Bradley, how are you doing today?
Very good. Thank you for having me.
All right. I'm going to hand it over
Thanks
to
for coming.
I'm going to hand it over to Gloria, and we're going to get this show started. Let's do it.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to Uncontrolled Opposition, where together we battle mind wars with truth strikes. I'm Gloria Guillo, an investigative journalist, and I'm here with my co-host, Professor Jayme Kuzmarov, managing editor of Covert Action magazine. Our producer and engineer is Jayme CheeseSlice. The opinions you hear are ours and that of our guest, not those of WBAI, the Pacifica Foundation, or the Progressive Radio Network. This content is intended for informational and educational purposes only and should not be interpreted as professional or legal advice. Listeners are encouraged to form their own opinions. Today's guest is best-selling author James Bradley. He will discuss his latest book with us, titled Precious Freedom. The long game. While we were here today to discuss how and why the Vietnamese people won against the United States war machine on April 30th, 1976, when North Vietnamese forces captured Saigon, now called Ho Chi Minh City, which led to the reunification of Vietnam. But first, let's fast forward and understand trade, because it explains why war is always an unconscionable scam against the working class, both domestic and foreign. Let's understand that even victories ultimately become losses because presently all economic systems remain tiny islands in a vicious sea run by transnational oligarchs. Real change depends on an internationally united working class, as explained by great luminaries, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. There is no difference between domestic and international class exploitation. We are all united in our shared oppression by a transnational oligarch. As we say here in Uncontrolled Opposition, it's always the predator class against us. It's prey. As prey, we should not engage in oppression Olympics, but join together in our diverse unity. Back to Vietnam. So if we look at who owns and controls the means of production, the transnational predator class never really lost the war against the people of Vietnam. They just changed their weapons. The bombs stopped falling in 1975, but the real invasion began in 1986 with a single Vietnamese word, doi mai, renovation. That was the surrender document disguised as reform because it opened the floodgates to foreign investment. So while we and the world celebrated guerrilla heroes in black pajamas defeating the mightiest empire on earth, oligarchs and their agents were working behind the scenes to execute a murderous trade embargo and other covert warfare. Let's understand that economic sanctions are covert warfare, and they kill through the process of lethal selection. Lethal selection institutionally denies adequate and life-sustaining shelter, healthcare, food, drinking water, etc. to a targeted population, so they die of illness, exposure, and pathogens from opportunistic diseases. Oligarchs organized the Soviet Union's balkanization by seeding color revolutions and proxy wars like Afghanistan, which resulted in the Soviet Union's economic cutbacks to struggling countries like Vietnam. The transnational oligarchs were organizing hunger and hyperinflation to do what napalm never could: force the brave Vietnamese people to their knees. And when the infiltrated Communist Party passed the Foreign Investment Law in 1987, the very first thing they sold was crude oil. It's no surprise that they shipped it straight to refineries in Japan and Singapore, owned behind the curtain by Mobil, Exxon, and others. By the way, Ronald Reagan was president, George Shultz was Secretary of State. By the time Bill Clinton normalized trade relations in 1995 with Vietnam and signed the trade agreement in 2001, the trap was sprung. Fast forward to right now, 2025. The US is Vietnam's largest export market. Full stop. I'll repeat. The US is Vietnam's largest export market. In 2023, Vietnam's exports to the US totaled approximately 114 billion, outpacing exports to China at 57 billion and the EU at 48 billion. 2024 data shows this trend continuing, with US imports from Vietnam reaching 136 billion. It's all smartphones, furniture, and footwear. Sounds like a potential victory. More exports than imports, right? Wrong. Who owns the factories? Intel, Nike, North Face, Samsung on American designs. Who owns the intellectual property? Transnational corporations. Who takes the high value profits home? Transnational oligarchs as majority stockholders. Vietnam gets low wage assembly jobs, the toxic waste, the 12-hour shifts, and the destroyed fishing villages turned into luxury golf resorts for foreigners. The same villages that survived Agent Orange now drown under concrete funded by BlackRock. The same families who rebuilt after the bombs now can't afford rice because the land grows dragon fruit for export. America didn't need to occupy Vietnam with troops. They occupied it with supply chains. They turned a battlefield into a balance sheet. The Soviet Union is gone. Russia's trade with Vietnam, a pathetic 2.6 billion. China sends the components, America takes the finished goods and the brand premium. Vietnam is the perfect colony. No US soldiers dying, no anti-war protests at home, just pure, quiet extraction. This is the long game of empire. First, you destroy a country with war, then you rescue it with investment, then you own it forever through debt, trade dependency, and foreign owned factories. This is imperialism on steroids. Let me repeat, this is the long game of empire. First, you destroy a country with war, then you rescue it with investment, then you own it forever through debt, trade dependency, and foreign owned factories. Ukraine is walking the exact same path right now. Soon the bombs will stop. BlackRock will arrive, the IMF will dictate terms, and some future president will sign a trade agreement while the transnational oligarchs toast another conquest. So when people celebrate Vietnam's victory over America, ask this: who really won then and now? Was it the Vietnamese people who can no longer afford to live on the coast their ancestors fished for 1,000 years? Or is it the same predator class that turned a war they lost on the battlefield into the most profitable colony they never had to govern? The bombs that killed and destroyed infrastructure were loud, but vulture capitalism and starvation is deadly silent. So now the chains are tighter than ever. Does it really matter if they are invisible? Within this context, it is critical to understand that class warfare is global. The predator class knows no nation state boundaries. It has no loyalty. Patriotism is a ruse. The historic concept of nation-state sovereignty is long dead. It died with World Wars I and II. Only a few sovereign nation-states survived the onslaught, and they are now in the Trump administration's crosshairs. These countries remain our only hope for our own independence and must be defended. Since the 2020 global lockdowns, it should be obvious to all that we are living in a techno-totalitarian world where the only thing all countries agree on is the more granular surveillance of our class and maintaining narrative control so we don't wake up and resist. Fast forward to today. No war on Venezuela, no regime change. There are no lies that justify transnational oligarchs stealing Venezuela's oil reserves with the military we fund with our tax dollars. No blood for the transnational oligarchs' oil. Thank you. Let me read a quote by Oliver Stone about James. James Bradley journeyed to Iwo Jima and returned with flags of our fathers, and now ventures to Vietnam and brings us precious freedom, where he reveals that if we had known what happened in the 60s in Vietnam, American mothers would never have sent their children to Iraq and Afghanistan. The truth is the best vaccination against great lies. James, please tell our audience what inspired you to focus on Iwo Jima and the U.S. war on Vietnam, and then walk us through your latest novel, Precious Freedom, and Extraordinary Research.
Well, people might know I'm James Bradley. My dad was one of the guys who helped raise 2 flags on Iwo Jima. When you look at a media picture of Donald Trump sitting in his office chair right now today, there's a statue behind him of the Iwo Jima flag raising. The tallest guy on that statue is my father. You can see the acne in his face. It was modeled after him. And my dad never talked about Iwo Jima. So after he died, I wondered what happened. And I made 7 years of phone calls and tried to figure it out. And that resulted in the book Flags of Our Fathers, which Steven Spielberg and Clint Eastwood made into the movie Flags of Our Fathers. So that got me writing about the Pacific, America in the Pacific. I had gone to university in Japan, in Tokyo, in the 70s. And my next book was Flyboys, about George Herbert Walker Bush was going to get his head cut off, and he was going to have his liver eaten by the Japanese on the island of Chichijima. And that was Flyboys, which Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks purchased and made into the HBO series The Pacific. And then I wanted to know, why were we out there in the Pacific? So I wrote 2 books, The Imperial Cruise and The China Mirage. The first one, The Imperial Cruise, is about Theodore Roosevelt pushing America out to the Pacific for the first time with the Spanish-American War. And then the China Mirage is about Franklin Roosevelt getting us involved in Asia to help China. It's an amazing story. You know, Franklin Roosevelt did not cut the Japanese oil, as we learn in school. He was up in Canada with Winston Churchill, and Dean Acheson and a bunch of idiots underneath him cut the oil. The Emperor of Japan knew that the Japanese oil was cut before Franklin Roosevelt did, but that's not how we're taught. Then I thought, you know, I'm of the age that I grew up with Vietnam. When I was 13 years old in 1967, my brother enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. Well, that's very interesting. My father was in the Marines and he won on Iwo Jima. They were victorious. My brother goes to Vietnam in 1967. And 2 years later, he comes back 40 pounds lighter. They had given him the last rites. He got shot right next to the heart. And so then, we lose that war, but we don't really admit it. With Vietnam, it's kind of fuzzy, like we could have won. Something went wrong out there. So I thought I need to learn about Vietnam. So I read the 250, 300 books that are published by Americans about Vietnam. And I interviewed a number of Vietnam veterans, American veterans, and the storyline is all the same. It was set by David Halberstam in his book, The Best and the Brightest. And the storyline is that we could have won. If McNamara had used a different hair gel, and if Johnson had had black shoes on in that meeting in June, and if only the general had turned left rather than right, we would have won. If Congress hadn't cut off the funding, and if the media hadn't sandbagged us, and so the veterans, the American veterans, are lost in this. We could have won if only. And if you read the books, they're all about tactical brilliance. The helicopter pilot was heroic, and the machine gunner and my buddy got hit, and these are all legitimate stories. But they don't tell the final thing, and that is, how did the Vietnamese win? So I caddied for Coach Vince Lombardi when I was a boy. And with us, it was win or lose. If you lost, you lost. And you tried to figure out why. So I went to Vietnam, and I thought, I'll just give this 3 years. I'll go to Vietnam for 3 years, and I'll come back with a book. Well, it took me over 10 years. Because I had to unwind all the Walter Cronkite, Ken Burns propaganda that were taught about Vietnam, about the war. And what this book focuses on the narrow time, 1967 to 1969. And in there, I go back to my brother's Marine base. And I discovered, and this is what Oliver Stone is talking about, if we knew what happened in this Marine area, we would have, America would have just stopped the war. What happened? In Dong Ha, this Marine base of Dong Ha, civilians, many of them girls, not women, but like 15, 16-year-old farm girls, pushed the United States Marines out. The Marines retreated in the dead of the night and got out of there. Why? The North Vietnamese army didn't attack them. There were no North Vietnamese tanks. There was no North Vietnamese armor. There was a bunch of kids, civilians, organized into something called People's War. Uncle Ho and General Giap had a strategy called People's War. And I was shocked to go back to Vietnam to realize that Uncle Ho got this strategy all the way down to the Buffalo Boys and the farm girls, and they knew what to do. And they had a cohesive plan, which never comes through in these American books. They had a cohesive plan of how to beat the Americans, and they beat them. So I was shocked I'm shocked to stand here and say I'm the only American author who went back to Vietnam and asked the Vietnamese, how did you win? Nobody has asked that simple question. And I wrote down 10 years of answers, and that's this book, Precious Freedom. In the end, if you look at all the Vietnamese stories and the documentaries, the bottom line is, America decided that the war wasn't moral, and Americans turned against the war. Well, what is Precious Freedom? What is the title of the book? Ho Chi Minh understood that he would win the war in America, not in Vietnam. And he understood it would be a moral case. Humans will not fight for an ism. I didn't meet anybody in Vietnam who was fighting for communism. They were fighting for their front yards, their backyards, their brothers, their sisters, their mothers. And Ho Chi Minh said, no matter how much you suffer, there's nothing more precious than freedom. And this wasn't just a saying, you guys. I heard this over and over and over as I went from house to house interviewing these veterans, and they would say, I got injured. I've got bullets in my body.
I just have to interject for a second. I hope President Trump reads your book.
Well, it's
because
a moral case.
I believe Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro have read Ho Chi Minh's understanding of this, because they've organized Venezuela along these lines, and they're going to resist. Back to you.
Okay, but no matter what Venezuela does, it's already the point is 70% of the American public do not support Trump's moves regarding Venezuela. You can't win. It's the home front has to be behind it. The home front was behind, get them after Pearl Harbor and get Hitler and clean them out. We were completely behind. You can argue about those cases, but we were behind it and we won. With Vietnam, the troops didn't know what they were fighting for, and Johnson couldn't explain it. President Johnson was up against the wall in 1967 in a press conference, and the press said, why are we in Vietnam? Well, the first thing is, why are they asking? Nobody asked Uncle Ho why we were fighting the Americans. You know what I mean? They knew why. Precious freedom. So they say to Lyndon Johnson, this is on YouTube, and Lyndon Johnson says, I think that if you saw a little kid somebody came along and grabbed it by the hair, you'd go and defend that little kid. Like, what are you talking about? Johnson could never come up with a rationale. He said, we're fighting there to prevent nuclear war. We're fighting there to keep China out, the domino theory. Just a minute. Uncle Ho declared independence 5 years before there was a Chinese government. China wasn't behind this. This is a moral case, precious freedom. So that's what the book is about this 2-year period where the Marines got pushed out, not by the military, but by civilians. And I interviewed those civilians, and they told me how they did it.
And a couple questions. Yeah, and it's a brilliant book. And yeah, unfortunately, I think there is this revisionist trend. Well, there were some at least critical books of the Vietnam War. This trend in academia, this revisionism that wants to venerate the South Vietnamese and kind of revitalize the language of the Cold War. That this was the U.S. was helping South Vietnam defend against North Vietnamese aggression. I wanted to ask you, though, one thing your book does very well is to trace out the propaganda. As you point out, the public was behind this as this great crusade against godless communism, in the 50s through, I guess, the mid 60s until, I think there was a certain breaking point when the public turned against the war. But maybe can you say something about the importance of Tom Dooley and the CIA propaganda of that era and how effective it was in building public support for the war, and then how this might relate to today's world where we're continuously bombarded with propaganda?
Well, this, one of the shocking things, really shocking, I go to Vietnam, and this Vietnamese guy is 85 years old, and he says, Mr. Bradley, look at your feet. And I'm sitting in a chair in his living room, and I looked at my feet, and he said, your feet are in Vietnam, right? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, this used to be your brother's base, and they told your brother this was American territory. He said, you guys had such big imaginations. He said, the French, he said, Mr. Bradley, I'm Vietnamese. There's only one Vietnam. And the French came and they said, you're Indo-Chinese. What is an we didn't think we were Indo-Chinese. We thought we were Vietnamese. Then the Americans came and they said, no, you're not Indo-Chinese. You're South Vietnamese. There's two countries here, North Vietnam and South. He said, Mr. Bradley, The New York Times and Walter Cronkite said there was a South Vietnam and a North Vietnam. We never thought that. And I went back to my hotel and I realized, oh my God, any documentary or any book that starts with South Vietnam versus North Vietnam, that is just total bullshit. That's not what was going on. That's what was going on in the New York Times and in the university professors right now. So how did this come about, this idea of a North and a South Vietnam? Well, okay, we don't know it at the time, we meaning the American taxpayer, but the French, see, the Vietnam War for America started in 1945 when Harry Truman gave the French the equipment that was sitting out in the Pacific after the Japanese surrender. So Charles de Gaulle said to Harry Truman, and Harry Truman, you know, he couldn't use chopsticks. He didn't know what was Vietnam. Charles de Gaulle, you know, you got to help us get the Indochina back or Stalin is going to take it, and communism. And Truman, oh my God. So he supports Charles de Gaulle trying to reimpose French colonial control. And there's this thing called Indochina. And the Vietnamese say, no, 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 no. We're Vietnamese. And they defeat the French. Well, I won't get into all the names. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles of the CIA and Eisenhower and all these guys, Lansdale, and you know these names. So, you know, Ho Chi Minh pushes the French out and he says there's one Vietnam, and the Vietnamese are ecstatic. They just push the colonial masters out. But back in Washington, they say, no, this is what we're going to do. We're going to say there's a South Vietnam and we'll put this dictator in, this Catholic guy. It's a Buddhist country, but we'll put a Catholic in. That's a good idea. And then we'll say North Vietnam is communist. And then it'll be a fight between the North and the South. And they needed to get this idea implanted in the American public. So they used a Navy doctor called Dr. Tom Dooley. Now, I went to the University of Notre Dame. When I was looking at the campus, one of the rooms was a Dr. Thomas Dooley room. Dr. Thomas Dooley is almost a saint in the Catholic religion. And why was Dr. Tom Dooley in 1961 was voted the third most popular man in the world, most admired man in the world. It was the Pope, Eisenhower, and Tom Dooley. John F. Kennedy started the Peace Corps based on the life of Dr. Tom Dooley. Well, what did Dr. Tom Dooley do? He wrote a book called Deliver Us from Evil. And the idea was that there was a North Vietnam full of bad commies, and they were attacking the Catholics. And then the Navy had a program called Operation Freedom. And if you can believe it, the U.S. Navy moved over 1 million North Catholics from the North to the South to pack them around Saigon, so there would be a Catholic, a Catholic ruling class down there. Well, the CIA promoted this in the United States like a Moses thing, like a Dunkirk thing, like parting the waters and saving all these people. What they didn't tell America was that we were bribing these Catholics. We were giving them more than they were making a year to take this trip. We did propaganda to say the United States is going to drop an atom bomb on Ho Chi Minh and Hanoi, and we'll give you and your family more than you make in a year to get on this ship. So you could see these people coming down, and Tom Dooley wrote a book called Deliver Us from Evil. And in the book, Deliver Us from Evil, you read that there were a bunch of Catholic Vietnamese boys reading the Bible. And the communists came and put chopsticks in their ears and stuffed chopsticks in their ears, and none of this happened. But there were these gruesome descriptions of how horrible the communists were. So you might laugh as you're listening to this now, But this was the most popular book in the 1950s about Vietnam. America didn't know what Vietnam was. It had been a colony off to the side. All of a sudden, there's this best-selling book, Deliver Us from Evil. Tom Dooley is on TV. Tom Dooley's on a national speaking tour. Tom Dooley is a Catholic, almost like a priest. He's a doctor helping the North Vietnamese. And this is what how the CIA installed in our minds, that there was a bad North Vietnam and a good South Vietnam. And I go back to Vietnam, and the Vietnamese say, "Oh, you Americans had big imaginations."
Mhm.
Well, we see that in Gaza, and we see that in Israel with the settlers. I mean, settlers are given housing and all kinds of deals to take over Palestinian lands. We see the lies that we were told about Hamas when they came in October. We see the lies that are going on right now about Venezuela and drug trafficking, which are complete and utter lies, have no basis in reality. So, I mean, there's really no change. The playbook that was used to promote war and the confiscation of lands and people and death and all of that stuff they used it then, they use it all the time. It's going on.
Yeah, and we were discussing another program, the committee on select committee, House Committee on China, and they're spreading the same stuff. China genocide, in Xinjiang province, and China's behind the fentanyl. Communist China, and they're stealing all. Now they're claiming that China's stealing land here. The guy who's running for governor in Oklahoma, Charles McCall, his campaign ad is like, "We have to stop the Chinese from stealing our farmland." He has no platform that will actually benefit any Oklahoman, so he has to turn it that the evil communists are now coming here, and he's going to safeguard them. So, but I related to James' point, I think less people believe it now. In those days, I think that people believed it in post-war America. I mean, I think America is a different place today. It's a more diverse country. I think with the experience of Vietnam, a lot of people became more cynical and critical thinking, and that's why they have to wage these wars more covertly. They can't marshal broad public support for a war like Vietnam again today. Would you say that, James?
Yeah, I would say it's end of empire. And if this book, Precious Freedom, is the beginning of the end, we went off the gold standard and all the inflation started because of Vietnam. We trusted our government until Vietnam. We had won wars before Vietnam. We had an honest military before Vietnam. It was a meritocracy. Vietnam was a turning point in terms of the government just lying its way into these things, using the public, the CIA out of control, thinking it can create. The CIA was brand new, right? Started in 47, 48, just getting their feet on the ground. And the Vietnam, it was Eisenhower in the 50s who has not been taken to task for this. All this Vietnam stuff blew up in the 60s, and we blame Johnson. You have to go back to Eisenhower. Eisenhower was the one who okayed all these CIA propaganda programs. Eisenhower was the one who said, "That's a good idea. Let's put a Catholic dictator in a Buddhist country." Eisenhower was the one who said, "Yeah, we'll create this North and South Vietnam." So the Geneva Agreement of 1954 said there'll be an election in 1956. So Eisenhower in America, we support democracies. Well, Eisenhower scuttled that election. And later he wrote in his memoirs, well, of course we had to scuttle the election, because if we had had an election, Ho Chi Minh would have got 80% of the vote. So you can see right there, democracy is fine if it's going to work out our way, but otherwise, it's so a lot. My point is, I write about this book in 67 to 69, but the seeds, the propaganda were planted in the 50s and then sprouted in the 60s. and it was a bad, smelly plant. And people say we didn't learn the lessons of Vietnam. Yes, we did. We learned the lessons of Vietnam was a profit center. Vietnam was extremely, what I learned is when I was a kid, I was looking at Vietnam on the TV and I was looking at the battles in Vietnam. And then when I researched this book, I realized Lyndon Johnson wasn't looking at Vietnam. He was looking at the committees in Congress. He was looking at the donations from Lockheed. He was looking at that party that they were giving that, tonight for a senator to raise money, and Raytheon was putting it on. That was what he
and to interrupt you, in his day, it was Brown and Root. His best friend was George Herman Brown, who had supported his career throughout the beginning, and he built all the bases in Vietnam, Brown and Root, and they made a fortune off the war. And he even said, Johnson said, "I can't get out. My friends are making too much money off the war." So go ahead.
No, but that's true. Bell Helicopter, who was buying helicopters in 1961? A helicopter was just a utility thing. It was Bell Helicopter was almost going broke. And then all of a sudden, boom, Vietnam, we're going to use the helicopter. Well, one of the stockholders in Bell Helicopter just happened to be Lady Bird Johnson. So, I'll tell you one story. And President Kennedy said to one of Dave Powers, one of his friends that's in the book, when I get out of Vietnam after I'm elected, I'll be the most unpopular president in history because there'll be another Joe McCarthy who lost China thing. So this is what they were focused on. Who lost China ruined the Truman administration. And Kennedy and Johnson and Nixon and Humphrey, they grew up under this who lost China thing that destroyed Harry Truman. And they didn't want a who lost Vietnam. So they were looking internally. When somebody came in the Oval Office and said, we're losing in Vietnam, to get some troops out there. I mean, do something. I can't have that who lost Vietnam blow up and ruin my career. So Kennedy says, I'll get elected in 64. And then I'm getting out of Vietnam, and I'll take the guff from the public. Well, guess what? The military knew that that's what he wanted to do, and they put a bullet right here. And Jackie saw the back of his head blow out, and it had blood all over her. And the next day, Lyndon Johnson said, I'm not going to be the president that lets Southeast Asia go the way that China went. And at the Christmas party that year, so we're talking December Christmas, 1 month after they blew the head off of John Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson's got his scotch. He drank about a bottle a day, and he's talking to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he says to him, you give me my election, and I'll give you your war. And you know what? Lyndon Johnson didn't get his head blown off. But Martin Luther King said, we got to get out of Vietnam. And then he got a bullet. And then Bobby Kennedy said, you got to elect me, and we got to stop this military industrial complex. And then he got a bullet right back, behind his right ear. It's just funny how all these guys who said, let's not have troops in Vietnam, they just got accidentally shot by these crazy guys. And the Lyndon Johnson, who said, pedal to the metal, I'll give you anything you want in terms of the military industrial complex, he died peacefully in his bed. That's all accidental.
Peace is very dangerous.
Well, if we have designed that system, I'm really not even criticizing Johnson in these. We designed a system where you've got to raise these billions of dollars to get elected. And who's it going to come from? We don't have any peace universities. We have war universities. We don't have a multi-trillion-dollar peace structure where the peace people can come and donate $1 billion to get you elected. We have a military industrial complex, and we have a 5-star general who got on TV. He worked on the speech for 3 years, and he told us as clearly as we can be told, you're going to lose your republic if you keep letting this military industrial complex grow, and the American public let it grow. So Kennedy said stop to the military industrial complex, and he got shot in public.
Yeah. Gloria, yeah. Well, where do we go from here? Well, what is your
It's quite, it's, you know, we have to let the dust settle from that statement. It needs its air.
But we designed this system. It's like, you know, with the Vietnam War, people look at the battles, you know, in what happened in Vietnam. No, it's what happened between the Oval Office. I've been in the Oval Office many times. Like I say, my father's statue is right behind Donald Trump in the Oval Office. And my image of the Oval Office is if you're president, there is 7 lions outside the Oval Office, and they have big mouths, and you have to throw them red meat. And those lions are the military industrial complex. So when we're finished with Afghanistan, you got to have a Ukraine. You got to have a Ukraine. You've got to have billions of dollars. You need to bomb the people of Gaza. You got to get that equipment out there, those bombs, those airplanes. Venezuela, even if we don't invade, it's billions of dollars to put those 10,000, 15,000 troops down in the Caribbean. You know, it's money. We got to keep that thing going if you're in the Washington system. And it's us who have allowed that to grow and metastasize. But we're just sitting back. You know, I really think if you took the American condition of the country, the homeless in the streets, the poverty, the 80% of the people are polling saying they don't approve of the way the government's going. The government just saying, we got Venezuela and Gaza and Ukraine. Will we track the money going to Ukraine? No. 300 billion, just shovel it up. If we took those American conditions and superimposed them on China, I think the Chinese people would overthrow their government. They wouldn't put up with it. Vietnam's growing like 8% a year. The 10 years I spent in Vietnam, the individual income doubled. The personal income of the humans doubled. Vietnam has the largest military in the world. People can't believe that. But if you look at the reserves plus the active military, Vietnam has the largest military in the world. And guess what? They're all within the borders. You try to get some drugs into Vietnam. You try to get illegal immigrants into Vietnam. I just shipped something to my adopted Agent Orange daughter. You know, I have to ship things to friends because I'm in Mauritius. DHL in Vietnam, you know, is the most detailed. You're not going to fool around with Vietnam because the government's there for the people and the people are benefiting. Whereas our American system, we're not. And, you know, it's up to us to do something about it. But I don't want to get off on that. But you can see that this rot, this cancer started with Vietnam. And it's in this book, Precious Freedom.
Yeah, well, it's a tremendous book that I think everybody should read, and it's really well written. I wanted to ask you, about what Gloria said at the beginning. I think that may be somewhat debatable. I mean, some of her points. You know, what would some of the people you interviewed? I mean, I think they're proud. They see themselves as an independent nation, you know, who defeated foreign empire, France, the United States. Although Gloria is suggesting that U.S. capital has kind of taken over their economy and exploiting them. I think there's certainly some truth to what Gloria is saying, but maybe there is more complexity to the story. What is your assessment?
That's a little above my head, what's Gloria's saying. I was lost in 1967. All of my friends, like I didn't do any business in Vietnam. Everyone I was talking to was in their 70s, and it was all about the war. But the bottom line, no matter what's happening, Japan's not free. Did you see the clip last week of a Japanese legislator asking the Japanese prime minister, is Japan really a sovereign country? Japan's not a sovereign country. It's run by the US military. I can tell you stories about how I know this. You know, I brought President Bush back to Japan, and I had to negotiate. We had to go back to closed Japanese bases. You don't know anyone who's been to Iwo Jima and Chichijima. You need to have the Japanese military bring you there. And I had to bring the former president of the United States in. And as I was negotiating to do this, the approval of the prime minister wasn't important. It was the American generals. If the American generals said something was going to happen, they told the Japanese prime minister like he was a little boy. My point is, Vietnam's free. No matter what's happening in Vietnam, the Vietnamese are controlling their own destiny. South Korea's not free. China's free. Japan's not free. The Philippines, are not free. Thailand is a subset of the Pentagon. So what Ho Chi Minh said is, we're going to have Vietnam for the Vietnamese. And no matter what's happening in Vietnam, they are free. It's the Vietnamese are running that country. The Japanese are not running Japan.
Well,
Yeah,
I just have to
go ahead, Gloria.
interject a little bit and just talk about myself. I'm trained in political economy, and I spent my career in New York City government as an urban planner, working in the inner city, doing renovation of housing. And I'm very at home in conditions that are considered ghettos or slums. And whenever I travel, and I travel extensively, and I've traveled quite more than most Americans, I think maybe you've traveled more, because James, because you're living outside the country right now, and I think you've pretty much lived outside for a long time. I spent about a month in Vietnam, and I traveled as an urban planner. I traveled looking at how people earned livings where they lived, what resources they had, what kind of health care, what kind of situations. And I did a lot of photojournalism while I was there. And there were a tremendous amount of slums. And the people I interviewed were working really at slave labor. They were working these 12-hour days, barely making a living, not having really what they needed. So the cost of living had gone up tremendously, and things that they had for free, they now had to pay for, and they didn't have enough money. And they saw the development that was going on as really a predator class, is our language, as really an elite, would be more a conventional language, serving the elite, not them. They saw a real class development that excluded them. And, it was very shocking to me at the time, because when I went there, I was, kind of ignorant and naive, and I was expecting to see more of a balance where, the working class and the kind of the underclass of people would have better provisions. And I was shocked that they didn't. And it necessitated in my heart to take a look at the economic relations that they were, under, and what were these changes and what happened. And, after understanding the embargo that they were forced to endure for a very prolonged period of time, and how desperate that made them, how they embraced this kind of open finance capital, because to them it seemed like some kind of a solution. And it really wasn't, because that money didn't go to the working class. It went to an elite. And, what we see, as political analysts and as economic theorists, is that we see this transnational elite throughout the world. And we see this elite has no patriotism. It doesn't care if they destroy the Soviet Union. It doesn't really care if they destroy China, or if they destroy the United States and they balkanize us. it's really, how do you get blood from a stone? And that's what we're seeing. So, I'm very concerned as to what's going on right now in Venezuela, because the lies are all over. I'm not sure if you're really plugged into social media. It's a horrible thing. I don't recommend it for anyone, but because of what I do here, I pay attention to social media, and the lies about Venezuela are just all over the place. As far as drug trade, which I've been to Venezuela, I oversaw their election as a international individual. One of the things I do is I look at elections, and see how they are carried out and all of that stuff. And I was shocked. They had a very nice election process, better than the United States. They didn't have their computers hooked up, their voting machines hooked up to the internet. They didn't have a proprietary software. I mean, the things that we object to in the United States, they had a very good system. And I wrote extensively about that. So, seeing what's going on now, this propaganda is very upsetting, and we're really on the precipice of something. And, I don't mean to take time from Vietnam on this, but right now we are on the edge of our seats, and the lies are no different. There may be a different lie. It's not communism. Now it's drug trafficking that they have to protect us, which is, silly. When you study the United States and the CIA and their promotion of drug trafficking and their guarding of the opium fields in Afghanistan and all over the world. So let me give it back to you guys.
I'll give you everything you say, but we're getting kind of wide here, going Vietnam, all over, Venezuela. But see, this was my focus. Can you see? Does that come through? Can you see that?
Yeah, we can see that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's my adopted daughter. If you notice, she has no fingers and no toes. So what I'm talking about is we went from my father paying for this. My father paid for the chemicals that went into her mother that made this girl come out, and she lives on a skateboard, okay? The number of napalm people, they're these older people said to me, Mr. Bradley, will you come and meet our daughter? And the daughter is scarred with napalm across her face. She's in her 40s by now, all across her body. And the parents said, Mr. Bradley, nobody will marry our daughter because she got scarred by napalm in 1969. I'm talking about people with no arms and legs because of what my father paid Lyndon Johnson to go do. And we're not doing that anymore. And Vietnam rose from napalm, from Agent Orange, from just the rape of the countryside. We killed 3 million people. I interviewed Marines who said the first time I got off a plane in Vietnam, there was this smell. And then I realized later it was the smell of death. The country stunk because we were killing so many people. And then we left them lying on their back, and we had we wouldn't trade with them for 20 years. And then finally so that's what I'm talking about. I'll agree with everything you analyzed, but what I'm analyzing is my brother and my father went out to do this. Millions of rapes, chemical destruction of a human people. If you read the book, I go to Agent Orange Village. It's a village, house after house after house, full of Agent Orange kids. The mothers are 80 years old. The kids are crawling around like, apes.
I highly recommend all Americans, especially, go to the War Remnants Museum in Ho Chi Minh City.
That's the museum. I've been to the humans. What I'm talking about, tourists can't get to. It's out in the middle of nowhere, and they won't let Americans. I shouldn't say that. Americans don't go there because they don't want to see the icky. So what my book is about is that my father, Bradley, my dad, got fooled to pay for the destruction of humans in Vietnam. And that has stopped because Ho Chi Minh put a halt to it, and it's a free country, and they control their airspace. The Japanese do not control the airspace of Japan. You know, China pushed the Americans out. So that's the only story I'm talking about. The present conditions, the political situation, Venezuela, I'll leave that all up to you. I'm just talking that in 1967, I was cheering this. I was cheering America going into Vietnam because I was 13 years old watching Walter Cronkite.
And well, one question, yeah, I mean, you got a lot of attention and invitations for your first book, Flags of Our Fathers, and I guess they, in a way, maybe they were using it to promote this patriotism. But ever since with your more recent books, you don't get the same media attention. Maybe say something about that, and what's the reception so far of this book?
The reception is great, especially from veterans, because no one has explained how the Vietnamese won. It's just that we're still like, well, McNamara went to his deathbed not knowing what happened. He didn't understand there was no North and South Vietnam. Maybe this was a civil war. I mean, McNamara, read his book. He didn't understand to his deathbed. So my book, The Vietnam Veterans of America, said it's all here. You got to read it. Bradley explains for the first time. So it's being well received. As far as Flags of Our Fathers, if you read Flags of Our Fathers, my dad cried in his sleep for 4 years after he came home. If you look at the flag raising picture, Donald Trump says that's heroism and courage. Geez, 3 of those guys got killed on Iwo Jima. 2 of the other guys drank themselves to death when they came back home. Ira Hayes, the Indian, was dead at the age of 33, face down, dead drunk. This is war. I wrote Flags of Our Fathers as a book. I thought this was going to stop us in our tracks with war. And then I had people coming up to me and saying, oh, Mr. Bradley, we got to get back to that patriotic time. So again, this is not about, presidents going wrong. This is about crazy warmongering Americans. We are the warmongers. We think this is wonderful, going out and killing people. And we've been doing it for the American military goes out and loses, and the public doesn't hang any of the generals. The public pays for all the pensions. Well, Venezuela, well, just a minute. Have you heard one person in the media, in the major media say, just a minute, what does this cost? Like, we don't have enough money to get the homeless off the streets of Chicago. But what does it cost to put 20,000 Americans down in the Caribbean on these huge ships and have the CIA go? Like, just give us a ballpark, Mr. President. This is billions and billions and billions of dollars, and Americans are sitting by like it's a football game. So it's us who are doing this.
Well, I think, just to clarify a bit, I don't think it's us doing it. It's certainly a elite that are doing this.
Are Americans rioting in the streets over the fact that we put 20,000 troops down there? I haven't seen any riots. I haven't seen any protests. If every lawyer, every priest, every minister, every whatever just walked outside on the street and stood there silently for 30 minutes, it would stop all this. I haven't seen any of their protests coming from Americans.
That's what's needed. You hit the nail on the head. You hit the nail on the head.
You can pick at my words. Okay, we're not.
No, you hit the nail on the head.
But we are allowing it, and it's going to keep happening. And if we're just criticizing, Trump and this guy and, no. It's us sitting in our living rooms. There's the Super Bowl. I watched that. That was an interesting game. Oh, here's Venezuela, and we got 20,000 troops. And then here's bombing in Gaza. And then, we are just putting up with this. And we were warned by President Eisenhower. So this is, again, Precious Freedom. The name of the book is that it boils down to a moral case. You can have all the jets and spend all the money in the world. The American military has not won a war in 80 years. I don't understand this. I truly don't. Like, I'm not trying to be rhetorical, but if I stand up, if I'm interviewed by the American press and say, well, the American military, that's the best military. We have the best military in the world. Americans will shake their head. Yes, we haven't won a war in 80 years. I'll bet on the Sandal guys, and I've been to Afghanistan. I've seen what the Afghanis look like with rifles on their donkeys. They won that war. The Vietnamese won that war. We're not winning wars, but we got this. The Americans are like military crazy. So yes, it is us that's allowing it, doing it somehow. And that's what Eisenhower didn't criticize the military. Eisenhower didn't criticize the national security. He said to the American people, he said, the answer is an educated public. You got to get off your asses. Eisenhower was talking to us, and we ignored it and allowed the next president to be shot, and then the next president to immediately go to war for no reason. The Vietnam War, I mean, you see it now like, oh, it was a big mistake and the Americans protested. That is total bullshit. The Americans were like 80% pedal to the metal with this. Just like the Iraq War. Oh, that was a mistake. We shouldn't have. What are you talking about? Americans were waving flags, 80% support. We are the warmongering public that is doing this. And and our elected officials are doing exactly what we want.
Well, I just have to interject for a second, but I think we've got to wrap it up. And all I'll say is the American public is one of the most propagandized publics in existence. And, I'd love to fault the American public, but it's beyond the American public. The American public, I believe, has a heart and soul and cares deeply about peace and justice and truth. But if they're being fed, hold on. If they're being fed a diet of a prevailing narrative that is an absolute lie, and if shows like ours and guests like you who have a soul and a heart and are coming out against this type of abuse, we have a little audience, and and as Jeremy's pointing out, the books that you've done that are just breathtaking and important. These things are sidelined because the prevailing narrative is what's shoved down people's throats. So people believe that an asset like Saddam Hussein is needs to have his entire country bombed to the Stone Age. People believe the lies because the lies are fed to them constantly. The narrative keeps going and going and going. I just even the 9/11 narrative. We saw. I'm a survivor of the collapse of the buildings and all of that stuff, and they had on just constantly showing the videos of the buildings coming down for about a month. 24/7, 365. They rally the people. So I'm not against the American public, but I believe that shows like ours and books like yours are so critical to get out there because we are fighting against a narrative that is much bigger than us. And we're just trying to give people some alternate ideas so that they can use their own judgment and say, hey, these guys are saying this, and the news is saying that.
Because we don't have a lot of time. You also have to look at the material. The American public has been a beneficiary of the U.S. empire in many ways, especially the middle to upper class who really had the clout in the society. So that's why I think you don't see more dissent. Because people do benefit from these imperialistic policy. They benefit from what you were describing, the extraction of raw materials from third world countries, from the corporate expansion. That does filter back. These oligarchs do provide philanthropy. They fund these universities that their kids go to. I mean, there are a lot of great programs in those universities. Yes, there are many problems, but we pointed to. But so my point is, I think you'd see, there's a level of material comfort that some people in American society enjoy. So we have to consider that as to why there's not more dissent, particularly the middle to upper class. When they start to feel the pinch, that's when you'll have real dissent.
Well, thank you for this
Possible.
program and for what you're doing, and let's keep going. I'd be thrilled if you gave me feedback on what type of feedback you get on the program.
Sure. Well, one thing I just want to say before we close the show out is please tell our audience how they can buy your important work.
Just send me gold bars and I'll promise. No. You can go to Amazon, Barnes & Noble. The book is out there. You can go to JamesBradley.com, see all my interviews, and send me an email. Just go to JamesBradley.com. I respond to all my emails. And the book just came out like 10 days ago. So it's brand new, but it had a lot of pre-orders worldwide. It's going to, when you talk about my books, my books have been translated in China and Taiwan and Japan and Korea and Vietnam. So there's a big Asian audience for this too that is watching this. And I think you're going to see a movie on this is my prediction. So it's out there, and it's a story about how, little boys like me got fooled, and we went out to Vietnam, and they had a plan, and they won. And we should stop doing that is my message. And I thank you guys for, being messengers of this type of message.
And just to close with, the words from Oliver Stone about you and your work is the truth is the best vaccination against great lies.
Oliver Stone, man, that's a veteran of Vietnam who really said it. And I appreciate him and you guys for getting the message out. So thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for coming and gracing us with your presence and your fantastic work. The opinions you hear are ours and that of our guest, not those of WBAI, the Pacifica Foundation, or the Progressive Radio Network. That wraps up our show for today. This is Uncontrolled Opposition. I'm Gloria Guillo, joined here by Professor Jayme Kuzmarov. Remember to like and share our broadcast. Your kind support keeps us going. Please find us on Substack, Twitter X, and Podbeam. Thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you next week. So we're still live. If you want to say anything else, James.
James probably has to go. So
yeah.
No, but how are you still live? What do you mean you're still live?
Yeah, we are still on YouTube and Twitter and or X and Rumble, and I think a couple other things. Kicks. There's a few other ones that we're still broadcasting on, but this is the part. The front part is what Jayme will edit for WBAI Radio in New York, which has a commercial signal and hits New Jersey.
A
lot of New York.
No, I definitely know WBAI.
And also we're on the Progressive Radio Network, which also streams us and has us on Podbeam and things like that. So that part is very clean. And then, the rest of the stuff, he kind of edits out our ums and ahs. If anyone curses, which none of us did on this show, which saves Jayme some work, or if we have like a long pause, he'll just shorten it. And then sometimes we are a little short. And if we say a few things after the show, then he has a little bit extra footage that he can plug a hole with.
Well, this time we're not short this week.
We're good? Okay.
We went way over actually. So it's gonna. I might have to actually cut stuff. Unfortunately, I usually never cut anything because I can edit it down pretty well. But we'll see how I can do it.
Okay. Well, James probably has to run because it's late there. So. Thank you, James. This was a great discussion.
And really good.
I thought, it was great to hear about your book, and we had some other issues that were interesting to bring up as well. So,
thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye from Mauritius. Bye-bye.
Okay. All right. Thanks for joining us.
Care.
And I'd just like to wrap up the show and say thanks to everybody watching us on the live stream. I hope you had a good one. there's a lot to take in from Vietnam, a lot of lessons to learn from Vietnam. I think we can apply going forward as well, and we all need to take that to heart. So thanks for watching. We'll be back again next week with another episode. And this is Pasta to Go with presenting Uncontrolled Opposition, which is our benefactor and executive producer is Craig Pasta Jardula. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
See